The station floated in the darkness between stars like a metal city that had forgotten its home. It was old, it was dirty, it was dangerous, but for thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds, it was the only place they could call home. The station had no government, it had no police, it had no laws except one: the strong survive and the weak learn to hide. This simple rule had kept the station running for 300 years. Traders came here to sell things that were illegal everywhere else. Criminals came here to escape justice, and ordinary people came here because they had nowhere else to go. Was one of those ordinary people. He was 32 years old, average height, with short black hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. He worked as a ship mechanic in the lower levels of the station, fixing engines and patching holes in old cargo ships. It was honest work, it was quiet work, and most importantly, it was work that let him stay invisible. Had come to station 5 years ago, carrying nothing but a small bag and memories he wished he could forget. Back on Earth, he had been a military engineer. He had a wife named and a daughter named. They lived in a small apartment near the ocean, and every Sunday they would walk along the beach together. Then the border wars came. A missile hit his apartment building while he was working at the base. By the time he got home, there was nothing left but smoke and broken stones. After that, stopped caring about most things. He sold everything he owned, bought a ticket to the farthest station he could find, and disappeared into the darkness of space. He did not want revenge. He did not want justice. He just wanted to be left alone. On this particular day was walking through the market district on level 7. The market was always crowded. Hundreds of different species moved through the narrow corridors, buying food, selling goods, and trying not to step on each other. The air smelled like 100 different worlds mixed together, strange spices and alien flowers and things that had no name in any human language. Was looking for a specific part for an old Terran freighter. The captain had promised to pay double if he could fix the ship by tomorrow. Double pay meant he could buy real food this week instead of the cheap protein paste that tasted like wet cardboard. He was examining a pile of used engine components when he heard the screaming. It started at the far end of the market. At first, it was just one voice, high and sharp with terror. Then more voices joined it. Looked up and saw something that made his blood turn cold. The crowd was running. Not walking fast, not moving with purpose. Running. Hundreds of beings were pushing and shoving and climbing over each other to get away from something. Had seen panic before. He had seen battlefields and bombing raids and the desperate fear of people who knew they were about to die. This was that same fear. And then he saw why. The creature that walked through the market was 7 feet tall. Its skin was the color of dark bronze, covered in patterns that looked like natural armor. Its head was long and narrow, with 4 eyes that glowed like red stars. Its arms were thick with muscle, and its hands ended in claws that could tear through metal. But the most terrifying thing was the blade. The creature held a sword that was almost as long as was tall. The blade was black, with edges that seemed to drink the light. Strange symbols were carved into the metal, glowing faintly with an inner fire. Knew what this creature was. Everyone in the galaxy knew. It was They were the most feared species in known space. They came from a world of endless jungles where everything was either a predator or prey. For 10,000 years they had hunted other species for sport, not for food, not for war, for fun. They called it the Great Hunt. Young warriors would travel to distant worlds and stations, seeking worthy prey. They would challenge their targets to ritual combat, and then they would kill them slowly, enjoying every moment of fear and pain. No species had ever defeated thee in open battle. No world had ever resisted their hunting fleets. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, and they knew it. The warrior, whose name was walked slowly through the market. He did not hurry. He did not need to. Every being in his path scrambled to get away, knocking over stalls and dropping their goods in their desperation to escape. I enjoyed this. He could smell their fear, thick and sweet in the recycled air. The fear of prey was like wine to his people, a pleasure that never grew old. He raised his blade and scanned the crowd, looking for someone worthy. His four eyes moved independently, tracking dozens of targets at once. A fat merchant hiding behind his stall, a group of young workers pressed against a wall, a mother clutching her child, both of them shaking with terror. All of them were afraid. All of them would run or beg or cry if he chose them. And then I saw the human. The human stood near a pile of machine parts, watching him with calm eyes. He was not running, he was not hiding, he was not even moving. He just stood there, his hands empty at his sides, looking at a like he was watching a ship dock at a port. I stopped walking. This was wrong, this was very wrong. In his 200 years of hunting, I had killed thousands of beings from dozens of species. He had hunted warriors and cowards, soldiers and civilians, the brave and the weak. All of them, without exception, had shown fear when they saw him. It was biology. It was instinct. It was the natural response of prey when faced with a predator. But this human showed nothing. Took a deep breath through the slits in his face, trying to smell the human's emotions. He expected to find fear hidden beneath a mask of courage. Humans were good at hiding their feelings, he had heard. They were a strange species that had only recently joined the galactic community. But there was no fear, there was no anger, there was no excitement or curiosity or even surprise. There was nothing. The human smelled like empty space. I walked toward him, pushing through the last few beings who were too slow to escape. The crowd had formed a wide circle around them now, watching from what they hoped was a safe distance. Everyone knew what happened when it chose its prey. Watched the alien approach. He knew he should be afraid. He knew that every cell in his body should be screaming at him to run. But that part of him had died 5 years ago in the smoke and ashes of a destroyed apartment building. He had nothing left to lose, and when you have nothing left to lose, fear becomes meaningless. Stopped 3 feet away from, up close, the alien was even more terrifying. His breath smelled like copper and meat. His red eyes pulsed with an inner light. The blade in his hand hummed with a sound just below the edge of hearing. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then I spoke. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. You do not run. It was not a question. Looked up at the massive predator. His heart beat slowly and steadily in his chest. No, he said simply, I do not. Tilted his head, studying this strange creature. In the language of his people, there was a word for beings who did not fear death. They called them broken. But this human did not seem broken. He seemed complete, as if fear was simply something he had left behind, like an old coat that no longer fit. Waima asked. Thought about his wife, he thought about his daughter. He thought about the small apartment near the ocean and the Sunday walks on the beach. Because I have already lost everything worth being afraid for, he said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. I had heard many things from his prey over the centuries. He had heard begging and bargaining, threats and prayers, promises and lies, but he had never heard anything like this. This human was not pretending to be brave. He was not hiding his fear behind a wall of false courage. He simply did not care if he lived or died. And that made him the most dangerous prey I had ever found. Slowly, lowered his blade. The crowd gasped. In all their years on station, none of them had ever seen a back down from anything. We will meet again, human, I said. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the station. Stood alone in the middle of the empty market. Around him, beings were slowly coming out of their hiding places, staring at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. He did not notice them. He was thinking about the look in the predator's eyes, the moment when Hunter had met prey and found something unexpected. He had a feeling his quiet life was about to become very complicated. The news spread through station like fire through dry grass. By the time the station's artificial sun dimmed for the night cycle, everyone had heard the story. A human had faced a warrior and did not run. The predator had walked away. It should have been impossible. In a small clinic on level 12, a woman named was treating a patient when she heard the news. She dropped her medical scanner and ran out the door before the patient could even ask what was wrong. Was 28 years old with long black hair that she kept tied back and eyes that were always watching, always thinking. She had come to station 3 years ago, running from a medical corporation that wanted to own her research. Now she ran an underground clinic for beings who could not afford real doctors. She was also the only real friend had on the station. She found him in his workshop, sitting on an old crate and staring at the wall. He looked the same as always, tired, quiet, alone. "Are you completely crazy?" shouted as she burst through the door. Looked up at her. "Hello to you too." "Do not hello me right now," grabbed his shoulders and shook him. You stood in front of a, do you know what they do to people? Do you know how they kill?" "I have heard stories." Stories let go of him and started packing around the small workshop. They do not just kill you, they hunt you. They chase you through corridors for hours, cutting you slowly, making you suffer. They drink in your fear like it is the finest wine, and you just stood there like you were waiting for a bus. Watched her pace. He did not kill me. He will come back, stopped and turned to face him. You know that, right? The do not walk away from prey. It is not in their nature. He is probably planning something right now, something worse. Shrugged, then he comes back. Stared at him for a long moment. Sometimes she forgot how broken he really was. When she first met him, she thought he was just quiet. Then she learned about his family, about Earth, about the missile that took everything from him. She understood now that the man sitting in front of her was already dead inside. He was just waiting for his body to catch up. She sat down next to him on the crate. "I know you do not care about your own life, but I care. You are my friend, my only friend on this stupid station. I do not want to watch you die." Something flickered in size. It was small, barely visible, but it was there. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone. "I am not planning to die," he said quietly. "Then promise me you will be careful." Nodded slowly. "I will try." Did not look convinced, but she accepted the answer. It was the best she was going to get. On the other side of the station, in a private chamber reserved for visiting predators, was having a very different conversation with himself. He sat in the darkness, his four eyes closed, replaying the encounter in his mind over and over again. The human's face, the human's voice, the human's empty, fearless scent. In 200 years of hunting, I had learned to read prey like a book. He could tell from a single glance whether a being would fight or flee, beg or bargain. He could predict their movements before they made them, understand their fears better than they understood themselves. But this human was a blank page. Opened his eyes and activated the information terminal in his chamber. If he could not understand this prey through instinct, he would understand it through knowledge. He began to research humanity. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans were a young species, barely 500 years into space travel. Their home world was a small blue planet called Earth, unremarkable in most ways. They were physically weak compared to most spacefaring species. They had no claws, no armor, no natural weapons of any kind. And yet they had never been conquered. Found records of the Dominion, a powerful empire that had ruled 100 star systems. 60 years ago, the Dominion had tried to enslave Earth's colonies. The war lasted 200 years. 200 years. Most species surrendered after a few decades of total war. The losses became too great, the suffering too unbearable. But humans did not surrender. They kept fighting. Even when they were losing, even when their cities were burning, even when rational calculation said they had no chance of winning. And in the end, the Dominion was gone, not defeated, gone, every ship destroyed, every colony burned, every member of their species hunted down and eliminated. Humans had committed genocide against a species that had tried to enslave them. Read this with growing unease. He had thought of humans as prey, weak, soft, harmless prey that had somehow stumbled into the stars, but prey did not exterminate their predators. Prey did not fight 200-year wars out of pure spite. He kept reading. Humans had a concept that did not exist in most galactic languages. They called it spite. It meant continuing to fight specifically because your enemy wanted you to stop. It meant causing yourself harm just to cause greater harm to someone who had wronged you. They had no word for this. They fought for glory, for pleasure, for the thrill of the hunt. The idea of fighting just to make someone else suffer, even at cost to yourself, was alien to them. I also found medical records that made him question what he thought he knew about biology. Human soldiers had been documented continuing to fight with injuries that would kill most species instantly. Missing limbs, punctured organs, massive blood loss. They would keep moving, keep fighting, keep going until their bodies physically could not function anymore. One record showed a human soldier who had taken 17 bullet wounds and still managed to kill 4 enemies before collapsing. Another showed a human pilot who flew her damaged ship into an enemy command center after her weapons failed, destroying both in the explosion. Humans called this sacrifice, it looked like madness. But the most disturbing thing found was hidden in the oldest archives. It was a classified report, sealed by the High Council 800 years ago. The report described a hunting expedition to Earth. I read it 3 times, certain he must be misunderstanding. The report said that a fleet of 20 hunting ships had traveled to Earth during what humans called the late medieval period. They had expected easy prey, primitive beings with simple weapons, perfect for sport. None of the ships returned. At first, the High Council assumed they had been lost to some accident, a solar storm perhaps, or a navigation error. They sent a second fleet to investigate. That fleet also disappeared. The High Council decided not to send a third fleet. Instead, they sealed all records of the expeditions and quietly added Earth to the list of worlds that were forbidden for hunting. No explanation was given, no reason was recorded. But I could read between the lines. They had lost 2 entire fleets to a primitive species with no space travel, and rather than admit this shame, they had erased it from history. Aligned back in his chair, his mind racing. What were humans? They looked weak, they smelled weak, they had none of the natural advantages that marked a predator species, and yet they had destroyed empires. They had survived everything the galaxy had thrown at them. They had made themselves afraid to return. And one of them had stood in front of it today and felt nothing. For the first time in his long life, I experienced something unfamiliar. It took him a while to identify the feeling because he had never felt it before. It was doubt. He had come to station looking for worthy prey. He had wanted a challenge, something to test his skills against. The humans certainly seemed like a challenge, but was it a challenge he could win? The older would have dismissed these thoughts as weakness. A true feared nothing. A true hunted whatever prey he chose, regardless of the risk. But the Olda had not read those classified reports. He stood up and began packing his chamber, his claws clicking against the metal floor. He had a decision to make. He could leave the station, forget about the human, and find easier prey somewhere else. No one would know, no one would judge him. Or he could stay, he could challenge the human properly. He could prove that there were still the greatest predators in the galaxy. Stopped packing, he knew what he had to do. The doubt in his heart only made the choice clearer. If he ran now, that doubt would follow him forever. He would always wonder what would have happened. He would always question if he had made the right choice. Did not live with doubt, faced his fears and conquered them. Activated his communication device and connected to the station's official channels. I am of the 4th hunt, he announced. I formally challenge the human known as to ritual combat. He has 1 rotation cycle to prepare. The hunt will take place in Cargo Bay 7 on level 3. He paused, then added the traditional ending. If he refuses, he becomes my property by right of conquest. There will be no appeal. The message went out to every screen and speaker on the station. Within minutes, everyone would know. The hunt was on. I heard the announcement in his workshop. The words echoed through the station's old speakers, crackling with static but perfectly clear. Ritual combat, 1 rotation cycle, cargo bay 7. If he refused, he would become property, a slave to a predator species that hunted intelligent beings for sport. He would spend whatever remained of his life as a trophy, kept alive only for the pleasure of his owner. He turned off the speaker and went back to working on his engine parts. Arrived 20 minutes later. She did not knock this time. She simply kicked the door open and stormed in, her face pale with fear and anger. "Tell me you are not going to accept," she said. He did not look up from his work. "I have to accept." "No, no, you do not," grabbed the engine part from his hands and threw it across the room. "You can run. I have contacts on 3 different stations. I can get you on a ship tonight before anyone even knows you are gone." "And then what?" Finally looked at her. "I run to another station. He follows me. I run again. He follows again. The do not give up, you know this. If I run now, I will run forever." "At least you will be alive." Will I stood up and walked to the small window that looked out into the station's interior. Thousands of lights blinked in the darkness, signs of life in every direction. I have been running for 5 years, running from Earth, running from my memories, running from everything that reminds me of what I lost. I am tired of running. Was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You want to die." No, turned to face her. "I do not want to die, but I am not afraid to die either. There is a difference. That difference will not matter when he is cutting you apart piece by piece." Smiled slightly. It was a strange smile, one that did not reach his eyes. "Maybe, but I have been reading about the hunting rituals. There are rules, structure. The prey has advantages that most people do not use because they are too afraid to think clearly." "What kind of advantages?" "The prey chooses the hunting ground," walked to his workbench and pulled out a worn data pad. "I have been looking at Cargo Bay 7. It is huge, abandoned, full of old containers and broken equipment. But more importantly, it is connected to 37 different maintenance tunnels, 12 emergency systems, and 4 environmental control nodes." Frowned. "You are an engineer, not a soldier." "Yes, and that is exactly why I might survive." Pulled up a map of the cargo bay on his data pad. "They are hunters. They are built for strength and speed. They expect their prey to run in straight lines, to hide in obvious places, to make the same mistakes that every frightened creature makes. They are not prepared for someone who understands how the hunting ground works." "You think you can outsmart him?" "I think I can outlast him. The ritual hunt has a time limit. If the prey survives until the cycle ends, the hunt is considered a draw. The loses honor, but the prey goes free." Sat down heavily on a crate. "How long is the time limit?" "6 hours." "6 hours," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to survive against a 200-year-old predator for 6 hours, in a cargo bay, with no weapons." I did not say no weapons, turned off his data pad and looked at her seriously. "The rules say the prey cannot bring weapons into the hunting ground, but they do not say anything about using what is already there." Stared at him for a long moment. She was starting to understand what he was planning, and it terrified her. "You are going to turn the entire cargo bay into a trap." "Several traps," corrected. "I have 24 hours. That is enough time to prepare." "And if your traps fail, if he catches you anyway?" Was quiet for a moment, then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was old and worn, the edges soft from years of handling. The image showed a woman with kind eyes and a little girl with her mother's smile. They were standing on a beach, the ocean blue behind them. "Then I will see my family again," he said simply. Felt tears forming in her eyes. She blinked them away angrily. "And you are a fool. And probably. A complete and total fool." "Well, yes." She stood up and walked to the door. Then she stopped and looked back at him. "What do you need?" Raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You have 24 hours to prepare a cargo bay full of traps. You are good, but you are not that good. You need help." She crossed her arms. "So tell me what you need." For the first time in a long time, felt something warm in his chest. It was not hope exactly. It was something older and simpler. It was the feeling of not being alone. "I need you to get me into the cargo bay's environmental control system," he said, "and I need medical supplies, a lot of medical supplies." "Why medical supplies?" "Because I am going to get hurt." Picked up the engine part that had thrown and examined it carefully. "The question is whether I can keep going after I get hurt. Humans have a higher pain tolerance than most species. I intend to use that advantage." Nodded slowly. "Anything else?" "Yes, I need you to make sure the station's broadcast system is working. When the hunt starts, I want every screen on this station showing what happens." "Why?" Smiled that strange, distant smile again. "Because this is not just about me surviving. This is about sending a message." Did not understand what he meant, but she could see that arguing would be pointless. She had known for 3 years, and in all that time she had never seen him this focused, this alive. Maybe facing death was exactly what he needed. "I will get you what you need," she said, "but if you die, I am going to be very angry with you." "I know." She left without another word. Stood alone in his workshop, looking at the photograph of his family. He thought about's laugh and's little hand in his. He thought about the Sunday walks on the beach, the smell of salt in the air, the warmth of the sun on his face. He had spent 5 years trying to forget, 5 years hiding from his memories, burying his pain under work and silence. But the memories never went away. They just waited, patient and inevitable, for the moment when he would finally face them. Maybe this was that moment. He put the photograph back in his pocket and picked up his data pad. He had 24 hours to prepare for the most dangerous hunt in the galaxy. A time to get to work. Across the station, I was also preparing. He sharpened his blade until it could cut through steel like paper. He reviewed his hunting techniques, practicing movements that had killed 1,000 different species. He meditated on the coming battle, visualizing every possible scenario. But even as he prepared, a part of his mind kept returning to the classified reports. The lost fleets, the forbidden planet, the species that had somehow defeated his ancestors. What had those ancient humans done? What weapons had they used? What tactics had turned predators into prey? I did not know. The reports had been thorough in their concealment. Whatever had happened on Earth 800 years ago had been erased so completely that not even rumor remained. But he would find out soon enough. In 24 hours he would hunt this human. He would push him to his limits. He would test everything the species had to offer. And then, one way or another, he would have his answer. The station's artificial sun began to brighten, signaling the start of a new day. All around station, beings of every species woke up with the same thought on their minds. Tomorrow a human would face in ritual combat. No one expected the human to survive. But everyone was going to watch anyway, because deep down, in the parts of their hearts that still believed in miracles, they all wanted to see the impossible happen. They wanted to see a predator become prey. The doors to Cargo Bay 7 opened with a grinding screech that echoed through the empty space. Stepped inside, wearing simple gray clothes and carrying nothing. Behind him, a crowd of spectators gathered at the observation windows, their faces pressed against the glass like children at an aquarium. The cargo bay was enormous. It stretched nearly half a kilometer in every direction, filled with mountains of abandoned containers, broken machinery, and debris from 100 forgotten shipments. Emergency lights cast long shadows across the floor, creating a maze of darkness and dim red glow. Somewhere in that maze was waiting. The rules of ritual combat were simple. The predator entered first and chose his starting position. The prey entered second and had 10 minutes to move before the hunt officially began. Once those 10 minutes ended, the hunt would last for 6 hours. The prey could use anything in the arena to survive. The predator could use only his blade and his natural abilities. If the prey survived for 6 hours, he went free. If the predator killed the prey, he claimed the body as a trophy. There was no surrender, there was no mercy. Walked into the darkness, his footsteps quiet on the metal floor. He had spent the last 24 hours memorizing every corner of this bay. He knew where the maintenance tunnels led. He knew which containers were hollow and which were solid. He knew exactly which panels hid the environmental controls he had secretly modified during the night. Had done her job well. The medical supplies were hidden in 3 different locations around the bay. The broadcast system was active, sending everything to every screen on the station. And most importantly, the environmental controls were now under command. Watched from the shadows as the human moved through the bay. He had expected fear. He had expected hesitation. Instead, the human moved with purpose, like someone walking through his own home. Well, interesting. The 10 minutes passed slowly. Used every second, positioning himself near one of the maintenance tunnel entrances. When the station's speakers announced the start of the hunt, he was already moving. A burst from the shadows like a demon from old nightmares. His blade caught the red light and threw it back in bloody reflections. His 4 eyes locked onto his position. His powerful legs pushed him forward at a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. Any other prey would have frozen in terror. Any other prey would have died in the first 30 seconds. Dropped into the maintenance tunnel and disappeared. Reached the tunnel entrance and stopped. The opening was too small for his massive frame. He could force his way through, but it would slow him down. The human was already gone, moving through passages that had been designed for beings much smaller than a warrior. For the first time, I felt the hunt becoming complicated. He pulled up his internal mapping system, trying to predict where the human would emerge. There were dozens of possible exits. The human could come out anywhere in the bay. A sound behind him. A spun blade ready just in time to see a heavy container falling toward him. He leaped aside, the container crashing into the floor where he had been standing. Metal screamed against metal. Sparks flew into the air. Above him was already running along a narrow catwalk, moving toward the next tunnel entrance. Roared and jumped. His powerful legs launched him 10 meters into the air. He grabbed the catwalk with one hand and swung himself up, landing just meters behind his prey. Did not look back, he ran. The next 2 hours became a deadly game of cat and mouse. A was faster but knew the terrain. Every time the predator got close, would disappear into a tunnel or trigger a trap, falling containers, shifting platforms. Once a section of floor collapsed under A's weight, dropping him into a lower level and forcing him to climb back up. The watching crowd could not believe what they were seeing. The human was not just surviving, he was fighting back, not with weapons or strength, but with planning and patience. But I was learning too. By the 3rd hour, he had mapped most of the human's tunnel system. He began predicting movements, cutting him off before he could reach safety. The traps started failing as I learned to watch for them. And was getting tired. Unlike who could hunt for days without rest was only human. His muscles burned with exhaustion. His lungs struggled for air. The small cuts and bruises he had accumulated were adding up, slowing him down. In the 4th hour, I finally caught him. Emerged from a tunnel and found the predator waiting. There was no time to run, no trap to trigger. A's blade flashed through the air and opened a deep cut across his back. The pain was incredible. Felt the warm rush of blood soaking through his shirt. He stumbled forward, barely managing to roll behind a container before the second swing could take his head. I circled the container, savoring the moment. He could smell the human's blood now. He could hear his ragged breathing. The prey was wounded. The prey was weakening. The hunt was almost over. But was not done. He had reached one of his hidden supply caches. His hands moved automatically, years of medical training kicking in despite the pain. He injected himself with a stimulant. He pressed a bandage against the wound. He forced himself to his feet. When I rounded the container, blade raised for the killing blow, was already gone. The 5th hour was the worst. Was bleeding from 3 different wounds now. The stimulant kept him moving, but he could feel his body failing. Every step was agony. Every breath was a victory. But he kept moving. I was impressed despite himself. He had hunted warriors who surrendered after the first wound. He had hunted soldiers who begged for death rather than continue the chase. This human did neither. He just kept going, dragging his broken body through tunnels and across catwalks, refusing to give up. It was beautiful. It was infuriating. It was everything I had ever wanted from a hunt. And it was making him doubt again. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, I was starting to understand what had happened to those fleets 800 years ago. He was starting to see why they had erased Earth from their hunting lists. Humans were not just prey. They were prey that refused to accept their role. They were prey that would rather die than submit. They were prey that would burn with your blade in their back rather than bend. and that made them the most dangerous prey in the galaxy. The sixth hour began with Cornered. He had made a mistake, taken a wrong turn, ended up in a dead-end corridor with no tunnels, no traps, and no way out. I walked toward him slowly, savoring every step. Lined against the wall, barely able to stand, blood dripped from his wounds and pooled at his feet. His face was pale, his hands were shaking. But his eyes were calm. "You have fought well," I said. "It was the highest compliment I could give to prey. Your death will bring me great honor." I laughed. It was a weak sound, but genuine. "You think this is over?" I stopped. Something in the human's voice made him hesitate. "Look around you," said. "Look at where we are." A's four eyes scanned the corridor. Metal walls, metal floor, metal ceiling, emergency lights, nothing special, nothing dangerous. Then he noticed the vents. 16 vents lined the walls of the corridor. All of them were open. All of them were pointed at the center of the passage. Where I was standing. "The cargo bay's atmospheric system," explained. "I spent 10 hours reprogramming it. Right now, those vents are ready to release compressed nitrogen at 200 kilometers per hour, cold enough to freeze flesh in seconds, strong enough to knock even off his feet." I looked at the vents, then at the human, then at the control panel on his wrist. "You would kill yourself too." "Maybe," smiled that strange smile again, "but I am betting you cannot reach me before I press this button, and if I go down, I am taking you with me." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then looked directly into A's eyes. "You know why your species has never conquered Earth?" I said nothing. "Because you tried once, 800 years ago. Your hunting fleet arrived. None of them returned." His voice was steady despite his wounds. "Your leaders erased it from your history because they were ashamed, but we remembered." "Impossible." "Is it?" Tilted his head. "We did not just kill them, we studied them. We learned their weaknesses, and then we broadcast the method to every species they had ever hunted." I felt something cold spreading through his chest. He did not want to believe it, but the human's eyes held no lies. "You are not prey," I said slowly. "No," agreed, "we never were." The timer on the wall showed 15 minutes remaining in the hunt. 15 minutes until the hunt ended in a draw. I looked at his blade, then at the human, then at the vents that surrounded him. Well, he had a choice to make. The corridor was silent. Neither the hunter nor the hunted moved. The timer on the wall counted down slowly, each second feeling like an hour. I stared at the human leaning against the wall, blood-covered clothes. His hands were shaking from exhaustion. By every measure that mattered, he should have been easy prey, a wounded animal waiting for the final blow. But those eyes, those calm, empty, fearless eyes, they were the eyes of something that had stopped being prey a long time ago. "You planned this from the beginning," I said. It was not a question. Nodded slowly. "The moment I heard your challenge, I knew how this hunt would end. Either I would die, or I would show the galaxy something it needed to see." "And what is that?" Glanced at the small blinking light near the ceiling. A camera, one of dozens that had activated throughout the cargo bay. Right now, every screen on this station is showing our fight. Every being who has ever cowered before is watching, and they are seeing something they never thought possible. Followed his gaze to the camera, his four eyes narrowed. They are seeing a hunter unable to kill a single wounded human, continued. They are seeing the mighty predator standing in a trap, afraid to move. I am not afraid. No raised his wrist, showing the control panel. Then come and kill me. 15 minutes left, plenty of time. All you have to do is cross this corridor and put that blade through my heart. Did not move. Because they both knew the truth, if a charged would trigger the vents. The compressed nitrogen would blast through the corridor, freezing everything in its path. Might survive, his natural armor protecting him from the worst of it, or he might not. They had never tested themselves against such cold. But would definitely die. The frozen gas would kill him in seconds. And the human did not seem to care. That was the part I could not understand. He had met brave prey before. He had met prey who fought back with surprising courage, but all of them in the end wanted to live. Their survival instinct would always win when the moment came. This human had no survival instinct. He had already made peace with death. He was not bluffing about pressing that button. Why, I asked, why would you die just to embarrass me? Was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. I told you before, I lost my family 5 years ago, my wife, my daughter, everything that gave my life meaning. He paused, gathering strength to continue. After that, I stopped caring about living. I just existed. I moved from day to day without purpose, without hope, without anything worth fighting for. Then why fight now? Smiled weakly, because I found something worth dying for. He looked at the camera again. Out there on stations like this one, there are millions of beings who live in fear. They wake up every day afraid of species like yours. They hide their children when predators walk by. They accept cruelty because they think they have no choice. His voice grew stronger despite his wounds. I want them to see that they do have a choice. I want them to see that even a wounded, bleeding, ordinary human can stand against the most feared predator in the galaxy. Maybe not win, but stand, refuse to submit, show that there is something inside us that cannot be hunted. I listened in silence. If I die here, I die sending that message. And maybe, somewhere, a young being who was always told to run will choose to fight instead. Maybe they will remember that a human once faced and did not break. The timer showed 10 minutes remaining. I realized something in that moment, something that changed everything. He had lost the hunt the moment he hesitated. Not because he was afraid to die, not because he doubted his ability to kill the human, but because this hunt was never really about killing. It was about dominance. It was about proving that they were still the greatest predators in existence. And he had failed. The galaxy was watching. Millions of beings from hundreds of species were seeing a warrior standing frozen in a corridor, unable to finish his prey. It did not matter if he killed the human now. It did not matter if he survived the trap. The damage was done. They were no longer untouchable. A single human, armed with nothing but his mind and his willingness to die, had broken their mystique forever. Slowly, lowered his blade. The watching crowd gasped. On screens across the station, beings stared in disbelief. A was surrendering, a was admitting defeat. "What are you?" I asked. His voice was quiet, almost respectful. Pushed himself off the wall, standing as straight as his wounded body would allow. "I am what happens when you give a prey species 1,000,000 years to evolve," he said. "We learned to use tools because we had no claws. We learned to work together because we were weak alone. We learned to think and plan because we could not rely on strength." He met A's eyes. "And we learned something else, something your species never understood." "What?" "The hunted can become the hunter." His voice was steady now, strong despite his injuries. "We do not run because we are afraid. We run because we are patient. We wait. We watch. We learn our enemy's weaknesses. And then, when the time is right, we strike back." The timer showed 5 minutes remaining. I looked at the human, at his wounds, at his pale face and shaking hands. By every physical measure should have been nothing. A weak, soft, harmless creature. But physical measures were not everything. Inside that fragile body was a mind that had turned a cargo bay into a battlefield, a will that had refused to break despite hours of pain, a soul that had chosen to die rather than submit. The hunted for the thrill of fear. They lived for the terror in their prey's eyes. Humans gave them neither. And that made humans something entirely new. Not prey, not predator, something else. Something that the galaxy had never seen before. Survivors. The timer hit 0. The station's speakers crackled to life. "The hunt is complete," an automated voice announced. "Time limit reached. Result, draw. Both participants are released with honor intact." I sheathed his blade. "I will remember you," he said. "You have taught me something today, something my people forgot a long time ago." "What is that?" I turned toward the exit. "That there are things in this universe more dangerous than predators." He walked away without looking back. The doors opened, light flooded into the cargo bay, and somewhere in the crowd pushed through the mass of bodies and ran toward her friend. She found him collapsed against the wall, barely conscious. Blood covered the floor around him. His eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow. But he was smiling. "You crazy fool," sobbed as she pressed bandages against his wounds. "You absolute crazy fool." I tried to laugh, but only managed a weak cough. Did it work? Looked at the crowd gathering at the observation windows. Beings of every species were cheering, crying, embracing each other. For the first time in their lives, they had seen hope. "Oh yes," she said, "it worked." And closed his eyes. The news spread across the galaxy in hours. The footage of the hunt was shared billions of times. Species that had lived in fear of for centuries watched a wounded human refuse to submit. They watched a predator walk away defeated. And something changed. On distant stations, beings who had always hidden began to stand a little. In dark corners of the galaxy, resistance movements that had given up hope began to organize again. They found their hunting expeditions met with unexpected resistance. A single human had not defeated an empire. He had not won a war or conquered a planet. But he had done something more important. He had shown the galaxy that fear was a choice. And sometimes the choice not to be afraid was the most powerful weapon of all. 3 months later was back in his workshop, fixing engines and patching hulls. His wounds had healed, leaving pale scars across his back and arms. He was quieter than ever, but something had changed in his eyes. The emptiness was still there, but it was different now. Softer, like a wound that was finally starting to heal. Visited him every week. She never talked about the hunt. Neither did he. But sometimes, when the station's artificial sun was setting and the lights of the market began to glow, they would sit together in comfortable silence. Anne would look at the photograph of his wife and daughter, and for the first time in 5 years, he would remember them without pain. He had not found a reason to live. But he had found something else, something small but precious. He had found a reason to keep going. And for now, that was enough. Far away in the void between stars, sat in his hunting ship and thought about the human. He had returned to his home world briefly, but the stories had reached there before him. The council was furious. The shame of his failure would follow him for centuries. But it did not feel ashamed. He felt educated. In 200 years of hunting, he had learned everything there was to know about prey. He had mastered the art of fear, the science of terror, the mathematics of death. And then a single human had shown him that there was still something to learn. Some prey could not be hunted. Some fear could not be created. Some spirits could not be broken. I looked out at the stars and wondered what else the galaxy was hiding. Somewhere out there, humans were building ships, raising children, living their strange and wonderful lives. They were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest or the most advanced. But they were the most stubborn. And in a galaxy full of predators, that might be the most important trait of all. The hunt was over, but the story was just beginning.